Hello and welcome.
Green Lantern Mosaic is an 18-issue series written by Gerard Jones and primarily illustrated by Cully Hamner. It was published by DC between 1992 and 1993. The Green Lantern that headlined this title was John Stewart, and in order to give this series some context, one has to take a few steps back and look at Stewart's recent history before the beginning of the series. John Stewart is an architect that was first drafted into the Green Lantern Corps during the classic Green Lantern and Green Arrow run by Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams. In essence, he was the backup Green Lantern should Hal Jordan or Guy Gardner be out of commission. It wasn't until the 80s that Stewart became more active in his role. He would be the primary Green Lantern during the early 80s, when Hal Jordan stepped aside. He received training from Katma Tui, who he subsequently started a relationship with. Then there was Crisis on Infinite Earths in 1985. This event rebooted everything, and the Green Lantern Corps essentially went unused until 1990. The most high-profile Green Lantern at this time was Guy Gardner, who played a significant role in Justice League International. In 1988, within Action Comics Weekly, a depowered Katma Tui is killed by Star Sapphire. A series of unfortunate events follows, and this leads John Stewart to leave Earth and wander space. Here he becomes part of the miniseries Cosmic Odyssey, also from 1988. Within this miniseries, he fails to prevent the destruction of a planet. All of this leads John Stewart to be a moderately broken man, desperately in need of redemption. This is where he's at when the Green Lantern title is rebooted in 1990, following the success of the miniseries Emerald Dawn. This rebooted Green Lantern title is primarily focused on Hal Jordan, but it does heavily include both Guy Gardner and John Stewart. The first 8 issues begin to set up the events that lead to Mosaic. This is followed by another 4-issue arc between issues 14 and 17 that directly set up the forthcoming Mosaic series. The first issue of the ongoing Mosaic series does provide a highly condensed version of prior events. John Stewart is the protector of Mosaic, a vast community established on the planet Oa by the insane guardian Api Ali Apsa. This is the same Guardian that once traveled America with Green Lantern and Green Arrow during the classic O'Neil and Adams run from the 70s. In fact, one of the small towns visited during the classic run are included in the Mosaic patchwork. The Guardians have returned from exile, and they've decided not to return these various cities to their respective worlds. The Guardians believe it's worthwhile to study how these various beings interact. It's John Stewart's duty to figure out how to get all of these different societies to get along in harmony. On top of this, Stewart is forced to face his own inner demons, both real and imagined, and accept the mistakes he's made in the past while avoiding making any new ones. The series reminds the reader Stewart is an architect, a builder, and it's not enough to construct something that appears to work on paper, it has to be practical as well. What he's trying to build has to survive the stresses it's put under, whether that be Stewart's own subconscious attempts to sabotage his own work, or building relationships between disparate cultures, or overcoming barriers in communication, or simply providing the resources to keep all of these beings alive. For the most part, that is the focus of the series, various stresses that test Stewart and the viability of this community at the center of the universe. There are some interesting creative touches. Occasionally, John Stewart monologues directly to the reader, and these odd fourth-wall breaks display a level of self-awareness not usually seen in superhero comics. These moments give the reader insight into Stewart in the most direct, honest manner. Unlike other superhero comics, there are some experimental surreal episodes. These symbolic trips are usually straightforward, although as seen in the letters page, many readers found them off-putting. This is likely because they defy expectations. Stewart's challenges are metaphysical, and they can't be solved by simply punching them away. While not immediately obvious, there is something he must acknowledge and overcome. On the surface, these episodes seem somewhat challenging, but they do reveal more than they conceal. These moments are necessary to get him to a place of realization and acceptance, which occurs near the end of the series. Somewhat like the classic O'Neil and Adams run, this series attempts to address social concerns. Mainly prejudice and misconceptions that lead to conflict. There are a lot of subtleties built into the narrative. Like good science fiction, it tackles the issues of the current era, but in a very allegorical manner. At first, the series doesn't address racism. But the topic becomes a significant part of the latter half of the series. There is an inevitability to the subject arising, not because John Stewart is a man of color, but because Mosaic is a community of colors and tribalism. Quite honestly, had this not been addressed, it may have been perceived as sidestepping the most obvious challenge to the harmony of Mosaic. Stewart himself has some biases instilled in him that he must overcome. Or, in other words, were given reasons for his more evolved opinion concerning race. The narrative doesn't allow the reader to presume that Stewart, due to being a hero and a man of color, automatically has the morally correct position. That is a trap of bland characterization, and to its credit, the story doesn't allow the reader to make that obvious presumption based on Stewart's status and skin color. Rockwell, the focus of the racist movement, whose name does evoke a specific 1950s version of Americana, is not a basic straw man. While his position isn't correct, his point of view is given a context and a justification. His fears and distrust aren't utterly irrational given his experience. None of this excuses his behavior, nor is he overly sympathetic, but it does challenge the reader to at least understand why he is the way he is. Basically, between Stewart and Rockwell, there is a contrast. Both have life experiences that have led them to different conclusions. One overcomes the ingrained social pressures of their upbringing, while the other succumbs to it and finds reasons to remain a product of the fear and misconceptions he holds. Overall, as a series, Mosaic is quite unique. Personally, I found the first 3 or 4 issues somewhat interesting, but not overly compelling. However, after that, once the initial setup is done, it really begins to transcend its roots. It simply gets better and better the further it moves along. As an in-depth character study, it's on point. John Stewart is fully fleshed out, and he really comes alive during the course of the series. As a superhero title, it has an unusual approach to the genre, which is something that likely led to its ultimate decline. In a very peculiar move, following issue number 5, the creative team were informed they had 1 year to wrap up the series. That is a lot of advance notice for cancellation. According to the artist, Cully Hamner, there were a few reasons the series was cancelled. He cites the Image Comics revolution and the focus on large action stories being a factor. Secondly, Hamner was informed that Mosaic didn't fit the editorial direction of the Green Lantern franchise, which does sound somewhat accurate. It was an unusual concept that focused on exploring cultural interactions and the clashes between them. It had action and conflict, but it wasn't standard action adventures. So it somewhat didn't fit the genre, nor the mandate of a mainstream publisher. Hamner does discount that sales were a reason for the title being cancelled. Although, looking at Mosaic's placement on the charts, sales were very likely a factor. Issue number 3 was number 81 in the top 300. By the 17th issue, it was number 236. So, it never really had impressive sales. Someone may have crunched the numbers early on and realized Mosaic would fall below the threshold of cancellation within a year. Thus, the team was given advance notice, since it was a series with a long, involved plot and direction. But that's a best guess. Mosaic probably didn't fit the vague editorial direction of the Green Lantern franchise, and its sales easily justified its cancellation. After all, Emerald Twilight and Hal Jordan's transformation into the villain, Parallax, was forthcoming. Following that, the Green Lantern Corps was destroyed yet again, and Mosaic, if it remained ongoing, didn't fit into those plans. Mosaic is also notable because its conclusion has essentially been scrubbed from Green Lantern lore. So for those that may be interested in this series, you may want to skip ahead to this timecode to avoid spoilers. At the end of the series, it's learned that John Stewart is the cause of Mosaic, not the Insane Guardian. That's the first twist. The second twist is that Stewart becomes the first and only mortal Guardian. According to the writer, Gerard Jones, this was something he intended to reveal in the 25th issue, but due to the series being cancelled, he had to discard some plans, condense other parts, and get to the conclusion before he ran out of time. It does feel a touch hurried, but it is a very satisfying conclusion. All the pieces fit together very well, and more to the point, it fits the overall theme that John Stewart is the Mosaic. All of his various parts, metaphysical and psychological, coalesce into one new entity. This is personified by the community he brought together on the Oa homeworld. At the end, there is a unity that emerges in both Stewart and the Mosaic. So becoming a guardian is a very fitting step in Stewart's evolution. In fact, it gives the entire title a new context, one that feels like a very logical conclusion to the preceding series of events. At the same time, it leaves open other possibilities to explore. Unfortunately, Stewart doesn't remain a guardian for very long. After Emerald Twilight, John Stewart is suddenly and inexplicably depowered in the pages of Darkstar number 21. He wakes up, and suddenly, he's just a former Green Lantern. Stewart is reset without any real explanation. Furthermore, in literally one panel within Darkstar's number 26, it's mentioned that the entire Mosaic was disassembled and returned to their proper worlds just before Emerald Twilight. As a retcon, it is brief and unrewarding. It basically dismisses the entire Mosaic series. End of spoilers. In the end, Green Lantern Mosaic is a comic book that's like its overall plot. It's an interesting experiment that was discontinued before its time. This video is brought to you courtesy of these very fine people. If you're not already subscribed to this channel, I encourage you to click the subscribe button and support Overlord Comics. If you'd like to go a step further, click the join button and choose the option most suitable for you.